Matt Schaff of DraftSharks.com here with Jared Smola and Shane Hallam, and we are going to run through a 12-team mock draft today on Sleeper. The details always matter whenever you're heading into a draft, of course. That's step one in our best way to draft article, know your rules. And it sounds obvious, but I think all three of us can remember examples of players in our leagues not knowing the rules well enough and it biting them usually all season long. And surprisingly, every year it keeps coming up. So before we get into any drafting or anything else, let's talk about the settings for this draft. It's 12 teams, PPR scoring, pretty common scoring otherwise. We got 1 point per 25 passing yards, 1 point per 10 yards rushing or receiving, 4 points per passing touchdown, 6 points for the other touchdowns. We will be drafting defenses and kickers. They score in the typical ways in their typical categories. Jared, what are we doing lineup wise? What positions are we playing?
Yeah, we're going obviously one quarterback here, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and 1 flex spot with 1 tight end. So a bit more of a lean towards wide receivers and, say a league that just requires you to start 2. So that definitely gets factored into the draft war room. We'll see wide receivers pushed up the rankings compared to running backs a bit.
Yeah, and we talked a little before when we were setting this up about whether to do 2 versus 3. I think our consensus is that it's probably still more popular to just have 2 wide receiver starters in home leagues for fantasy, but I doubt that there's a big gap between 2 or 3. And Shane, I think that you really still get a better view of how the draft is going to go with that 3 wide receiver setting, even if you're playing in a league that only starts 2, then vice versa.
And I think we've seen that strategy become more and more popular to go wide receiver heavy, whether you're starting 3 or whether you're starting 2. But if you have a league that only starts 2, I think you're going to gain a lot more from this mock than the other way around.
And we are going to be using the Draft Sharks Draft War Room, of course, as we go. I know that these two guys are going to be looking at rankings basically exactly the same as mine. So that might go into my thinking as I draft. But we're going to start this draft by actually syncing the Draft War Room. So you can now see the sync process on your screen. I have already hit Add League. I'm going to hit Sync Your League to get this started. We are drafting on Sleeper, as I mentioned, and you can see it fetching all the info right now. It's got all these leagues that I'm involved in. We're the Draft Sharks August mock draft, and that's it. Now I could check the scoring to make sure it matches up. This is pretty typical scoring, so I think I'm going to go with it. I could hit mock draft if I didn't already have 2 of my colleagues here to mock draft with me. Instead, I'm just going to go into the Draft War Room and get this thing started, and immediately you'll see the rankings pop up for the format I'm playing. I have the first pick in this draft. I'm on the clock. We'll show that real quick. There's the draft room on Sleeper with the sidebar from Draft Sharks right on the side. So even if you don't want to have the 2 different tabs going at the same time, I've got the same picks right here. I see CD Lamb is the recommendation. He's still holding out, so it's not totally comfy, but there's nothing totally comfy about taking the first overall pick. So I'm going to go ahead and take CD Lamb to start this thing.
Yeah, we're still about 2 weeks away from me being worried about CD Lamb, especially when you consider he's back in the same offense with the same quarterback. Like, I don't think it's going to take long for him to kind of ramp up to the season. So, like, as long as he's signed by the end of August, I think his fantasy stock is kind of unaffected. Okay, so I'm on the clock here at 7, and my draft war room has Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson as the top 2 picks. So again, despite this being a bit wide receiver heavy, Breece Hall is going to be my pick. I do slightly prefer him over Bijan Robinson, which I think is a bit against consensus. And I like the fact that we've seen the elite season from Breece Hall last year, coming off the ACL in a crappy offense. Like, he's healthier now. Hopefully Rodgers stays healthy. So it's going to be Breece Hall for me at the 1-7.
Shane, you agree with Breece Hall over Bijan Robinson?
I think I'd probably go Bijan, but I think it's a 50-50 split. I mean, I've definitely taken Breece over Bijan in some leagues and Bijan over Breece Hall in some leagues. I think that tier of those top 3 running backs is pretty clear. I think Bijan might get a little more receiving work, though we saw Breece Hall, get a ton last year. So I'm fine with Jared taking either one of those guys there. 11, not the ideal draft position, but I'm going to take Puka Nacua here. That's what my draft war room recommends. And despite the knee injury, I feel pretty good about him being ready for week 1. That appears to be where he's on track. And I think there's a nice tier break after Puka. So I want to definitely get one of them in the 3 wide receiver setting. And then coming back in round 2, now I think I could take the running back. I had basically 3 guys here that are fairly equal for me: Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyren Williams, and then Jonathan Taylor, who's at the top of the recommended in the draft war room. I'm obviously going to get one of those guys back, and this time it was Jonathan Taylor who fell, and he should get all those carries for the Colts, and I think be a solid RB1.
Jared, let's go back to Nakua first. Shane mentioned the knee injury. He, of course, has been adjusted down in our projections since that knee injury, but he's still popping as a round 1 pick for you, right?
Yeah, we lowered his floor projection a tad after the knee injury. And what that did, Nakua, Wilson, and AJ Brown have been in the same tier all along. Nakua was leading that tier before the knee injury. Now he's at the back of that tier. But again, it was a very small move down. I still think the 11th pick is kind of where he should go. I would have taken Puka there as well. I'm going to go with the draft forum recommendation here and take Drake London, who I've kind of been on all offseason. It was nice early on when you could get him in like the 3rd or even 4th round sometimes. I think that was maybe before they even acquired Kirk Cousins, but now he kind of goes in this early to mid 2nd round range. I think that's where he belongs. I don't think he's like a massive value here, but I think you just look at the per route efficiency he's had and then consider the additional routes he's going to run now that Arthur Smith's out of town. I think London makes sense there.
Yeah, I think anywhere in the middle of round 2 is fine for London. He's been closer to the 1-2 turn in best ball drafts, which makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but I think anywhere in the middle of round 2 is fine for him. I think Saquon Barkley versus Jonathan Taylor is interesting and going to be a decision that people are facing very regularly. Shane, are you leaning more strongly toward Taylor over Barkley, or is it closer?
I think I lean Taylor over Barkley. Both have that rushing quarterback that could snipe some of those touchdowns. Anthony Richardson with Jonathan Taylor and Jalen Hurts with Barkley. I feel like the Eagles aren't going to stop what worked last year with the tush push and the Hurts, double-digit touchdowns. I think that's going to remain. So I feel more confident in Taylor's maybe touchdown efficiency, even with Anthony Richardson there, than Saquon Barkley. And I also think the Colts are more likely to give that workhorse role to Taylor. Eagles always like to sprinkle in some additional backs. And so I think we could have some games where Barkley disappoints. I think Taylor will be a little more consistent of a presence.
I hear what you're saying, but I think that the different spending that they did on running back this year shows that they think Saquon Barkley is a much different player than they've had since, I don't even know how long ago. Ricky Waters, Brian Westbrook even shared time. Like Ricky Waters seriously might be the last time that they actually had a workhorse back. Deuce Staley was that for a tiny bit in there, but even that we're talking about a long time ago. So I hesitate to make a strong prediction between Taylor and Barkley because I think they're extremely similar for all the reasons that you said. Both have running quarterbacks that they're dealing with. Both have questions of how many touchdowns that takes away from them. And I think they both have questions of how many receptions they get with those quarterbacks that are going to scramble more often than some other guys, as opposed to dumping off to running backs. But we're also talking about two elite talents on teams that have invested in them. So I think we should assume there will be lots of work. From there, we'll kind of see how it goes. What about you, Jared, between these two guys?
The difference for me and why I do lean Taylor, not by a lot, but like I'm in most drafts, if I actually had that decision, I'm taking Taylor like 8 out of 10 times. The difference for me is that Jonathan Taylor is 25 and a half years old. Saquon Barkley is 27 and a half years old. That 27, 28 is where you can kind of start to worry about running backs drop off, where I'd have zero concerns about Jonathan Taylor dropping off.
And you can tell that Jared has young children because he's still counting ages by months instead of just years. Let's go now to the end of round 2. I'm picking at the turn. Let's see what the sidebar has for me. We saw plenty of running backs go, by the way. We had those 2 around the turn, Jahmyr Gibbs and Kyron Williams. I think, Shane, you'd probably be smiling if those are the 2 running backs that went before your turn in an actual draft. I've got Devon Achane, Isaiah Pacheco, and Derrick Henry topping my board. Of course, I started with a wide receiver. Any of those running backs, I think, is fine for me here. I've really been liking Pacheco lately because if he does operate more like a workhorse for these Chiefs, I mean, he could just be a really consistent weekly scorer, more so than Derrick Henry, I think, who doesn't get the receiving, more so than Devon Achane, who's just a smaller guy and is not going to get as consistent workload. So that's where I'd lean among those 3. I'm not going to say any of the 3 is wrong for you, though. The draft war room is telling me to take another running back here in Achane. That would be a fine pick. I'm going to go for the next players down, though, and focus on wide receiver instead. And frankly, I think Jalen Waddle, Cooper Kupp are a toss-up in that spot. I'm going to lean Kupp here just because I think that existing knee injury for Puka Nacua gives a little bit more upside that maybe Nacua is limited early in the season and we get bigger numbers from Cooper Kupp.
I think Kupp and Waddle are pretty similar in that their teams 1B wide receivers at this point. But like, I think even if the guys ahead of them stay healthy, I think the 2-3 turn is a good spot for Kupp and Waddle. And then if Puka Nacua or Tyreek Hill go down, Kupp and Waddle are round one values. I think the upside on both those guys is just massive, and I think it makes some good picks in that range.
And even with the healthy Hill the year before, we had Waddle finish, I believe, 13th in PPR scoring. Now he has to go, hyper efficient to do that with Tyreek Hill getting that monster target share. But we know that Jalen Waddle is capable of doing that. He's in an offense that's capable of producing that hyper efficiency. So, Jared, now you're up in round 3. Who you got?
I mean, speaking of Jalen Waddle, he's going to be my pick here. In the middle of round 3, Kyron Williams used to sometimes get into round 3, obviously nowhere close here. Then Devin A-Chain sometimes gets there as well. Those are kind of the only two running backs I look at in round 3. If those guys are gone, I'm always taking a wide receiver in the middle of round 3. I like a lot of these guys. We talked about Cooper Kupp. I'm taking Jalen Waddle here. I think Nico Collins, DJ Moore are also excellent picks in round 3. So middle of round 3 is definitely tends to be a wide receiver spot.
And of course, it's a computer taking Patrick Mahomes right behind you, but that's the kind of pick that you smile at if you're in an actual league drafting and somebody takes Patrick Mahomes right there, right?
For sure.
Shane, who you got at 11?
Well, I'm going to keep pounding the wide receivers here. I would have loved to get Nico Collins, who went at the 309, but I do like getting Deebo Samuel, who's the top of the recommended from the draft war room, here at the 311. I think just on a per game basis, when he plays, he has been a wide receiver 1. I think sometimes people get a little bit too afraid of injuries. With Deebo, you can replace him if he's not playing in a game. But when he's playing, I get a wide receiver 1 in my wide receiver 2 spot. And then I'm going to continue to finalize my 3 wide receivers here. Some tough choices. I think I'm considering Malik Nabers for the pure upside of having a rookie, though he, got banged up a little bit in camp. And then T. Higgins, one of our values, I think is a real possibility. But I'm going to swing for the fences here with Malik Nabers, the early 4th. I think he's going to be a target hog for the Giants and has looked amazing in camp and was a top receiver for me in the draft. I thought he was one of the best 3 players in the entire NFL draft.
Yeah, I think Deebo Samuel is a terrific value right now, especially with the still uncertain situation around Brandon Ayuk. If Ayuk leaves, then Deebo Samuel, I think, is going to rocket up in ADP. So if you're drafting right now, I think you take advantage, and then we'll see where he lands. For all the reasons that you say, I also like Deebo. And Malik Nabers is interesting in that you see even here, he's 2 full rounds behind Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between their situations. What about you, Shane?
No, I think people just don't like the Giants offense, don't like Daniel Jones. And I like Kyler Murray, but the Arizona Cardinals offense is not significantly better than what the Giants are putting on the field. And ultimately, I think the Giants defense is just as bad. They're going to have to throw the ball. And Nabers, the guy that they've been playing in camp, inside in the slot, outside. I love moving that wide receiver around. We've seen these slot wide receivers be really good. So give me Nabers in the early 4th over Harrison in the early 2nd every day of the week.
Right. The Cardinals offense, I would expect, will be better than the Giants offense, but I don't know that it will. I don't think either one is going to be amazing where we're like, oh, we got to get pieces of that offense. And frankly, if the Giants are really bad, then they might lean even more heavily on their most talented pass catcher. Jared, what do you think about Nabers versus Harrison here?
I think Deebo Samuel, I love those 2 picks by Shane. I think Deebo Samuel and Malik Nabers should be early to mid round 3 picks in this format, specifically with the 3 wide receivers. I think Deebo Samuel's a guy kind of similar to Kupp and Jalen Waddle, honestly, where, we kind of know what he is with Ayuk there. But then if Ayuk leaves, I think Deebo's probably a 2nd round pick at least. And then, Nabers, for all the reasons you guys mentioned, he's going to see the targets. He is an excellent talent. I get the fear with the Giants, but go back 2 years ago, Dable's first year there, that was a functional offense. Like, they were middle of the pack in most, offensive categories. I think they could definitely get back to that level this year.
Yeah, Deebo's actually a late round 2 guy for me right now. All right, Jared is up in the middle of round 4. Who you got?
Toss up between a couple running backs and a couple wideouts. I'm going to lean towards the wideouts in this format. The draft war room actually agrees with me. It does have a wide receiver at the top of the board. Is Devonta Smith at the top of the board over T. Higgins? That's partly because of ADP. Smith just goes earlier, so the board's saying, there's a good chance T. Higgins makes it back to me in the 5th. I don't know if that's going to happen with Matt having 2 picks here in between me, but I'll roll the dice. I think Smith and Higgins are close enough. And again, I might end up leaning running back in the 5th anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and take Devonta Smith here.
I wonder if teammate there was hoping for the double Bengals wide receiver and then Joe Burrow later on, but let's hope that the computers aren't quite that smart yet, that they're not thinking that far ahead in their draft strategy. I hate to make my buddy Jared sad, but T. Higgins is not going to last past this round. checking my war room sidebar, I've got a couple running backs up top. I don't like James Cook. I don't think he is as much of a fit for his role as the team made him at the end of last season. So I worry about him holding up. I worry about him producing, and I worry about him losing work, even if Ray Davis isn't amazing, the rookie that they drafted this year. So James Cook will not be in my plans, but I'm fine with Joe Mixon at this spot. We'll certainly keep watching his hamstring situation to make sure that's not an issue heading into the season. But I think he's a fine pick here. I'm going to follow my board and take Joe Mixon as my second running back. And then I'm going to follow that with T. Higgins just because I like to, disappoint Jared at times.
If you're in a draft without other Draft Sharks insiders, you're probably going to get T. Higgins, most spots in round 5. I think he's an excellent value there. I mean, I get he can be annoying with the time he misses, but when the guy plays, he's a borderline wide receiver 1. He's been like wide receiver 14 and wide receiver 15, I think, in PPR points per game and 2 of the last 3 seasons here. So I just think, fade the fear over the injury stuff and just draft T. Higgins because I think he's a really strong value.
Yeah, and those 2 seasons were the 2 years where he had a healthy Joe Burrow. So healthy Joe Burrow plus T. Higgins has equaled very good things. And now that he's down the board, that injury risk is already built in. If your wide receiver 3 goes down, that's much less impactful than if your wide receiver 1 goes down. Jared, up in the middle of round 5, what's the board saying?
Matt just took one of my guys. I'm going to take one of Matt's guys now. It's really a guy I love too, James Conner, who really is kind of the running back version of T. Higgins, right? Where he's probably going to miss a handful of games this season, but he's also maybe even going to produce as an RB1 when he's on the field this year. That Cardinals running game was good last year, no matter who was getting the ball. There was some fear over Trey Benson stealing work from James Conner. Benson's kind of got off to a slow start in camp. I don't think, at least early on in the year, he's really going to be much of a factor. I think this is still Conner's backfield if he doesn't drop off, and I don't expect him to. So I think he's a really strong pick in the 5th.
Yeah, and that's what reports out of camp have said. So certainly James Conner, my guy, your guy, should be everybody's guy. Shane, what do you got?
Things started to get dicey, and we saw most of the tight ends go off the board with Kittle and Kincaid going here in the 5th. So I think tight end is not a possibility. So I want to fill out the rest of my running back room. Definitely some options. The draft worm suggests Ramondre Stevenson, DeAndre Swift, Aaron Jones. I'm going to play the ceiling. I'm going to take DeAndre Swift, running back for the Chicago Bears here. There's a lot of options there in Chicago, so I'm not sure how the pass catching will be, but he seems to be the clear, RB1 in an offense that's going to score points more than the Patriots. So to me, I'd rather take a shot on Swift as my RB2. And then 602 here, I'm going to fill out that flex position with a wide receiver. And the suggestion by the draft war room, which I will take, is Chris Godwin, the wide receiver for the Buccaneers. Being a pick 11, Chris Godwin's not coming back to me in the late 7th. Maybe he would last another half round or get to the early 7th round. Should have scored a lot more touchdowns this past season than he did. And I think we're going to see a big change with that passing game. Baker Mayfield getting the contract. I think this is kind of the last hurrah where they're going to try to win this division. I think Godwin's going to be a bigger part of the plans this year than they was last year, especially in the red zone.
We already know Chris Godwin's a good player. We've seen it. We've seen the upside go all the way to wide receiver 2 overall. I know that Tom Brady's not there anymore. I'm not saying he has that kind of upside this season, but there's basically no downside to Chris Godwin as a 4th wide receiver in fantasy. I want to point out at this moment that I think Shane is sandwiched between a 60-year-old bot drafter down here on the end with 4 running backs, a quarterback, and a tight end through 6 rounds. And then that guy's grandson right here going for a 0 RB build. But, that's part of why it's fun to do these mock drafts and why it's worthwhile to do them, because you can have ADP, you can do your underdog drafting if you're drafting on there, but you never really know exactly how it's going to go. So having these practice runs gets you ready for stuff like George Kittle going as early as he did. And Grandpa here at the end drafting the way he is.
And by the way, you can always rip through mock drafts on Draft Sharks with our mock draft trainer. We went on Sleeper here so we could show you how the draft forum works. But you can fire off a mock on Draft Sharks in like 5 minutes. You can really rip off a bunch and kind of see how different strategies play. I do that all the time as I'm prepping for my drafts.
So Jared, who you got in the middle of round 6?
Ramondre Stevenson is an option here. I just kind of hate clicking his name. He just doesn't excite me. I think that Pat's offense is going to be really bad. The O-line is an issue. I think Stevenson might lose passing down snaps to Antonio Gibson. The contract extension Stevenson got made me feel a bit better about his role, but I'm going to pass on Stevenson, go with just a more exciting guy. I'm going to take Rashee Rice here. Obviously has the suspension risk. We're still waiting to see what happens there. As my fourth receiver, if he does get suspended 6 games or whatever, I can kind of survive without him early in the season. If he somehow dodges a suspension this season, which does look possible, I think I'm getting a 2 or 3 round discount here.
We've seen the NFL hesitate to take action before a player's legal stuff is worked out. And I mean,
Yep.
It was a bad offseason for Rashee Rice, but it's not domestic violence or some of the more serious situations. I think even his assault accusation turned out to not generate a case. So I would not be surprised if we get slow motion here. I think the fact that we don't have anything yet makes me think that a 6-game suspension is unlikely, but we'll see. And like you said, at this stage, there's a lot more upside than downside risk to drafting him. 6-7 turn, we're going to open the sidebar back up and see what's recommended. Christian Kirk, I think, is a good pick as a 4th wide receiver. So I'm going to follow the board and take him right there. And then that's probably going to pop the quarterback to the top of my board. And honestly, I'm just fine with taking Joe Burrow as my quarterback at this point as well. The 8th quarterback off the board, I think a fine time for Joe Burrow. We know he has the upside to finish among the top 5. I do already have T. Higgins on my roster. I don't think that's really a factor either way, to be honest. I'm fine stacking my quarterback with that wide receiver, especially because it's just my wide receiver 3 and one of his top 2 targets on the team. But I would also be fine with Joe Burrow here if I had neither top 2 Bengals receiver. What about you, Shane? Do you stack it all in a redraft format?
I don't think you force it. Like in just a 12-team league, it doesn't matter all that much. Maybe it gives you a little bit of upside, and that's really what we play for. You could have those big spike weeks. So in your situation, absolutely take Joe Burrow. The value's good. But don't bypass a better quarterback just to stack anything in your home league.
Burrow just straight up is good value there. He's our quarterback 6 in this scoring system. And like you said, Matt, you got him at quarterback 8. So I think, regardless of the stack, I think Burrow makes sense at the 6-7 turn.
If you like what you've seen in the video so far, please subscribe to the Draft Sharks YouTube channel. If you're finding us for the first time, we've got lots of other stuff already available. Sleepers, draft guide, the wildly popular best draft position video, even some IDP stuff. If you're, really into fantasy like I am, you can subscribe, you get notified when we post new stuff on the YouTube channel, or you know what? Just subscribe to support us because we're all pretty nice guys. We're doing our best out here on these fantasy streets. Jumping back into the draft. And by the way, I mentioned that this is 12-team PPR. Maybe that's not your exact format, but we have a whole series of draft guide articles on draftsharks.com. We hit 12 teams, 10 teams, 14 team. We added an 8 team this year by request. And I mean, Jared, no matter how many we do, we always have people requesting more. I think that just shows you how useful an article it is.
For sure. Yeah. And we obviously can't cover every single different league size and format, but that's where the draft war room comes in. The draft war room can handle every single type of league size and format and scoring system. So that's always your top tool.
So back to Jared's formulating draft plan. And by the way, I agree with not necessarily taking the running back last time, especially when you have 2 running backs that you feel pretty good about starting on a weekly basis. Breece Hall, James Conner. There'll be time to get that injury insurance behind Conner.
The other reason I passed on Stevenson is that tier at running back at that point felt kind of flat, and we only had 2 running backs go off the board between my 2 picks here, Stevenson and Harris. So really there's like 3 running backs I'm looking at that are still kind of in the same tier. I'm going to go ahead and take one of them here. I'm going to take Tony Pollard. I'm just kind of into that Titans offense. I think we've heard the coaching staff all offseason talk up the running backs, specifically in the passing game. And I think we even saw that in the preseason openers. Pollard and Spears both caught a few passes. So I think they're both going to be busy in the passing game. I like the offense to kind of surprise. So Pollard's going to be my pick here.
I like it at this stage. Shane, how you feel about Tony Pollard this year, or the Tennessee backfield in general?
I've taken both Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. I love those split backfields where you're getting upside value, right? If one guy goes down and, Pollard has some standalone value, they paid him the money to bring him in. I've definitely found myself in this 7th to 8th round range. Some of the running backs in the split backfields I think are valuable. I'm up here at the 7-11 with Grandpa behind me with his 4 running backs. I think I can wait maybe till my 802, despite the draft war room is recommending numerous running backs to me. I think this is a good spot to maybe take that tight end, and the top tight end right after the top couple running backs in the draft war room is Jake Ferguson, a tight end for the Dallas Cowboys. I think the de facto number 2 target getter there for the Dallas Cowboys after CeeDee Lamb. I'm not a big Brandon Cooks fan. They really haven't done much. Jalen Tolbert is getting camp reports. Like Jake Ferguson's going to get a ton of targets. And so I think in a PPR format, I like getting him as my tight end one. And now I could take the running back surprisingly on the turn. He didn't go for the fifth running back off the board. And I think there's a great value that I think you guys like as well. And that's Raheem Mostert, the running back for the Miami Dolphins, who led the league in rushing touchdowns last year. To get him in the early eighth, I feel really good about that. Is a potential player I could plug into my flex over Chris Godwin with a good matchup, even splitting carries with Devon Achane. And knowing Achane probably get a little more carries than Mostert this year. As an RB3, I think you can do a heck of a lot worse.
Yeah, I agree with the value there. I agree with the value on Jake Ferguson. I think from a practical standpoint, it's worth noting the specific positions here. You talked about how the drafter behind you already had 4 running backs, so unlikely to take one. Also had a tight end already, so probably unlikely to take that. I think if you were just looking to take one or the other of those positions, I would wait around the turn. Like if you weren't looking for running back with that second pick, maybe wait on Ferguson, because you can assume that a real drafter, we don't know how computers are going to do it, but a real drafter would probably not take that second tight end right there. You'd probably be safe. But I think in this case, because it was tight end and running back, and those were both positions that team already had pretty well fortified, you just take what you want and then take the other one around the turn, right?
Yeah, definitely. If I was considering a receiver, I would have taken him at the 7-11 instead of waiting around to the 802.
This honestly worked out perfect for you because the team at 12 is like building the exact opposite as you. So you guys are kind of looking for different things now as we get into these middle rounds. So team 12 probably isn't going to be sniping you very much at the turn here.
And even if you're not drafting in a room like Sleeper where it's easy to see the grid as you go, your draft war room has a draft grid up just like this. So you can, if you're in Shane's spot, look at this team behind you and say, man, that guy is very old and loading up on running backs and not taking wide receivers. So if I'm here, I'm thinking about a receiver, not sure whether to take him in 7 or wait until after the turn, take that receiver there, just like Shane said. Just another good way to track how things are going and plot out your picks. Don't focus too much on those other teams you're drafting against, but that's just enough focus so that you know what you have a shot at around the
Here,
turn.
I'm definitely have my mind on tight end at this point. Now, there are 2 tight ends out there I still like. Matt's the only team behind me that does not have a tight end yet. So I'm going to assume these computers are smart and aren't going to double up at tight end. So I'm going to pass one more time at that position. And I'm going to take a running back I considered in the 7th round in Jalen Warren. Kind of similar deal to Pollard, right? Like he's going to be splitting work in Pittsburgh, but Warren's going to do the majority of the pass catching stuff for the Steelers. And then if Najee Harris gets hurt, Warren probably turns into a top 15 back. As an 8th round pick, I think he makes a lot of sense.
I can't argue at all with Jalen Warren in the middle of round 8. I'm going to guess before checking that my draft war room wants me to take a tight end here. So let's click in and see. It does not have Brock Bowers at the top of the board. So that's good because honestly, I didn't want to take a tight end right here. I would rather take an upside running back. And that's exactly what is topping my board. I have 2 running backs so far. I mentioned it with Jared's team. Pacheco and Mixon are going to be my weekly starters. So this is a good spot to take rookie Jonathan Brooks. I know he's not expected to be ready, especially early in the season. So it's a better spot for me to have him, wait for him to be ready. And then if I lose Mixon at some point, if I lose Pacheco, or maybe if Brooks just shows that he's worth playing in the flex spot, then I've got him later on. Now I've got those tight ends pushed to the top of the sidebar from the draft war room inside my sleeper draft room. I got to say, guys, I still don't think that there's much of a gap between Bowers, Goddard, and some guys that will be around later. So I'm going to pass on tight end. I'm going to take the second player on my sidebar and go Jackson Smith-Njigba, who we have included in sleepers. We've included him in a sleepers video. We included him as a runner-up in our breakouts article. Jackson Smith-Njigba is certainly not a guarantee to give us fantasy points this year, meaningful fantasy points, but he certainly seems much better set up to do so this year than he was last year. He's already kind of intimated that the new coaching staff has a better plan for his usage than the old one did. He also shares the field with Tyler Lockett, who has reached that age 32 that our historical aging curve data shows is a worrisome age for wide receivers. It's the age where guys can just hit a cliff. And Tyler Lockett is not, he's very good, but he's not that elite level wide receiver who have been able to play through that. He really fits more into the bucket of guys that have seen a significant drop off. Again, not a guarantee that he does, but it's a risk factor. And if that does happen, that only helps the younger guy that's on his team looking for targets, looking for production, and who, by the way, already produced in an Ohio State wide receiver core with lots of talent around him.
Yeah, and even DK Metcalf to me falls short of elite wide receiver, right? Like he's been more of a 22 to 24% target share guy throughout his career. He's not someone who's going to come in and dominate with 28+% of the targets. So there is plenty of room for JSN to get targets this season in a brand new offense, which I think can only be good for him. And the last thing with JSN is he's cheaper now than he was last year, despite being in a better situation. So he's a guy I've drafted a ton of.
Yeah, and to your point on Metcalf, he's more T. Higgins than he is Jamar Chase.
Yes, for sure.
All right, to the middle of round 9. What you got, Jared?
I'm going to gamble here, which is easy to do because it's just a mock draft. But I'm looking again. So we did have Bowers come off the board, so we had a team take a second tight end. But I'm looking again, and all these teams between my next 2 picks have a tight end. So I'm going to keep pushing it. I am with you, Matt. Like I do like Goddard, who is the top tight end on our board. But if I have to take someone behind him, I think it's okay. I'm going to lock up Jaden Daniels here. Easily my favorite quarterback at cost. If you've been with us at all this offseason, you've heard plenty about Jaden Daniels, but the elite rushing ability combined with what I think is underrated passing ability, he has top 5 fantasy upside this season. I think he's even like a safe bet to at least be like a top 12 quarterback because of that rushing.
Pretty unanimous among us on Jaden Daniels for all the reasons you said. All right, who do you got?
Yes, and at the 9-11 here, one thing I love about the draft war room, when you get into these later rounds, the upside mode turns on, so you start to draft players that have that upside. And the wide receiver recommendation for me that I'm going to take is Jameson Williams, wide receiver for the Detroit Lions. I mean, he's been getting some really positive buzz. Dan Campbell is one of the most honest coaches when he says things, when he says basically Jameson Williams is locked into that number 2 role. I think you have to take that and accept it. And once again, Grandpa in the end, I don't think it's taken a quarterback or a running back, so it was safe for me to take Jameson at the 9-11 and not wait around. At the 10-02, definitely have some choices here. I think I'm going to hold off on the quarterback. I think there's a nice, pretty big tier with Trevor Lawrence, the Jaguars. I'm going to take another running back here and get another kind of upside play at running back, and that's Chase Brown, the running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, who seems to have a slight edge on Zach Moss. They're probably going to split pretty evenly. I was a big fan of Chase Brown coming out of Illinois, going into his second year. He couldn't pass block very well as a rookie. The advanced metrics aren't great, but I mean, he was on the field. When he was on the field, they used him and over 60% of his snaps, he had a touch. I think he's going to be the pass-catching running back there at the very least, and give me some upside for some situational play in bye weeks.
Let's say he has some pink flags. They're not full-on red flags, but he has some things that he needs to improve on. But it's also worth noting that he shares the backfield with another guy who has been limited. Like Zach Moss is coming off his best season so far in the pros, but the seasons before that were not amazing. So there should be work for both of those guys. And upside mode is important to bring up. It's switched on in that round for us. And what that does is highlight the high upside players in the second half of the draft, right, Jared?
Yeah, exactly, which is how you want to draft. That's why we built this upside mode into the draft forum, because that's how we draft. You want to be taking players who, if they do hit, they're actually going to matter for your team. They're going to start. They're going to potentially be, difference-making picks. So I'm not saying you completely ignore floor in the late rounds, but upside should be weighted much, much heavier. That's exactly what the upside mode does on the draft war room.
Even if you get to a turn where you're like, I don't like who upside mode is telling me to take here, you can switch it off and see what the non-upside mode version is going to say for you to take. You can switch it on earlier in your draft if you want to see who has the higher ceiling because you're having trouble deciding between 2 guys. Very useful. And like Jared said, that's what you should be hunting for as you get later in your draft, especially. So, Jared, get us going again in the middle of round 10.
I like that Dalton Schultz popped up as the top pick when you turned off upside mode. That's just perfect. He's the guy I think about when I think of a guy that doesn't have a ton of upside. Grandpa there at the turn did take a second tight end. I should have assumed he would do that. Goddard is who I would have liked to have taken in. Chase Brown was the other guy I kind of had in my queue. I think, getting him in round 10. Now, if you get into a sharper league, he's probably not going to get to round 10 anymore. We're seeing him pushed up into round 8. Now that Brown's off the board, there's no one else at wide receiver or running back I'm super excited about. So I'm just going to go ahead and take my tight end in Pat Freiermuth, who's my favorite guy, still on the board here. Disappointing last year, but we've already seen him have a top 10 fantasy season. He's had a healthy offseason. He's in this Arthur Smith offense that really features tight ends. Targets tight ends consistently above league average rate. Now, if Brandon Ayuk ends up in Pittsburgh, that's a knock against Freiermuth, but I'm going to kind of hope that doesn't happen. And if it doesn't, I think Freiermuth is a pretty decent bet to finish as a top 12 tight end this year.
And I think it'll hurt George Pickens and other wide receivers a lot more than it'll hurt Freiermuth. There should be work available for him. It's not like he's coming off the field in favor of Brandon Ayuk, because we know Arthur Smith is not going to load the field with wide receivers and sling it, especially with his quarterbacks. I'm up at the 10-11 turn. I can tell you for sure that Freiermuth would not have made it back had you allowed him to get to me here. TJ Hawkinson is top of my board at tight end. Obviously, we don't know yet when he's going to be on the field. I think he's a fine pick here. I'm not going to take him because I want to see how things go if I pass on tight end at this turn. Jared, you mentioned that it's easier to gamble in these mock drafts. I think even more so, it's advantageous to gamble. You want to take a shot here that you're not necessarily going to take in your live draft just to see how it goes. If you just draft the way that you always draft in your real drafts, then you're going to wind up with the team you always wind up with. I think what you want to do, take some chances. With that in mind, I've got Hawkinson up top. I got Nick Chubb, another guy that I'm not excited about. Zach Charbonnet is next because he does have upside, but he also has a block in front of him. So really, there are a bunch of different directions that I can go with this pick. So I'm going to start with Jerome Ford at this turn. I mentioned I don't love Nick Chubb. We'll see where he goes, but I've already got a running back that I know is probably not going to give me a whole lot early in the season. So I don't really want to tempt fate by going with two of those guys behind my two starters, even though I have two solid starters. So I'll take Jerome Ford, who I think is going to have a role whether or not Nick Chubb is ready. Then in that second spot, I'm actually going to scroll down my rankings on the draft war room because I like Jacoby Myers here. And part of it is him. He's just been a productive player throughout his still young career so far. But the other part is I'm not sure what to make of Devontae Adams this year. Part of that's the situation. We don't know if the quarterbacks are going to support regularly useful fantasy production, but another part is his age. Devontae Adams is also hitting that age 32 season like Tyler Lockett. So there is some potential decline to him. We saw Jacoby Myers produce well beyond what his ADP was last year. So for all those reasons, I feel good about him being my fifth wideout on a PPR team.
He's just like a nice safety blanket to have on your bench, right? Like when bye weeks hit or if you have injuries, like you can kind of count on Myers getting you like 10 to 15 PPR points a game to just kind of keep you afloat.
I think he's the kind of guy that can get a little overlooked when we're talking about upside. You know, we think about flashy players. Jacoby Myers is a pretty good bet to finish inside wide receiver 3 territory and has upside to reach the bottom of the top 24. That's still an upside pick in this range, even if he doesn't seem like the most exciting option. Jared, who you got in round 11?
I feel like I got to make a brand pick here and take Mike Williams, who I've been talking up all offseason. I think I'm highest on Draft Shark staff on Mike Williams. Obviously coming off the ACL, not a guy I expect to be someone we're starting for the first month of the season. Which again, you're taking him in round 11. He's going to be my fifth wide receiver. I don't need to start him. I will say, now that I'm thinking through it, though, I'm not sure if Mike Williams and Rashee Rice are the best combo, right? Because they both might be unusable week one. So actually, I'm gonna pivot as I thought through that. I'm instead going to take Rashid Shaheed, who ranked similarly for us to Mike Williams, and I think just fits this team better. I think that's that's an important thing to think about as you're building teams. Straight up, I prefer Mike Williams for this team with Rice on it. If he is suspended early in the season, I think I'd rather have Shaheed on this team.
And you think even as your fifth receiver, you are less comfortable getting two of those potential early season question marks?
Yeah, just because again, we're starting 3 wide receivers and a flex. I definitely could start a running back in that flex spot with Jalen Warren, but just having the optionality of being used a receiver in that spot, which generally in a full PPR you'd like to have a receiver in that flex spot. So I don't think Rice and Williams are the best fits on the same team.
I agree. And Shane, you get your round 11 pick after probably my favorite point in any draft, and that's when somebody else in the league takes the first kicker. Not only the first one, but the second one right before you.
We got 3 in this round 11. This is a kicker heavy draft, so always love to see that. It definitely happens. I guess I'll reap what Jared sowed. I'll take Mike Williams here at the 11-11, and as a wide receiver 6, once again, kind of swinging for upside. If I get a usable receiver between him and Jameson Williams, then I'm pretty happy with that, and that will end the receivers for my team ultimately. And then I need a quarterback. I think I have to take one here as we kind of approach the end of the draft. And not an exciting pick. I'm looking between Deshaun Watson, for the Browns, or Will Levis has some upside for the Titans. I think I'm going to play it a little bit safe and take Deshaun Watson here, who I still think has upside. The Browns seem to want to continue to add weapons. They were in the Brandon Ayuk sweepstakes. I think Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku are pretty good weapons. Plus, if Nick Chubb is not 100%, they might lean a little more on the pass than we've seen in the past. So I'm happy with that, going late round quarterback to get Watson here in the 12th.
Interesting to hear somebody call Deshaun Watson the safe option. I mean,
Yeah.
he's more of a known commodity than Will Levis. Certainly wasn't awesome the past 2 years. In hindsight, at this point, looking at how your roster is shaped up now, would you have made different decisions at quarterback at any other stage earlier to get a better starter than Watson?
I probably would have opted for a quarterback maybe over Jameson Williams there in the late ninth, or Chase Brown in the early 10th. Take in a Tua, Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence probably would have been my pick there. Offers a similar floor to Watson, but I think Lawrence's ceiling is just so much higher. And that's why you do these, right? To see how it plays out. And now, maybe I pushed a little bit too hard at quarterback, so my actual draft, I'm not going to wait until the 12th round for that position.
Yeah, and that gets back to the taking chances thing that I mentioned earlier. If you're not sure, go ahead and pass on the quarterback and see what happens. If you wind up with Deshaun Watson as your QB1 in a mock, doesn't matter at all. If you wind up with Deshaun Watson as your QB1 in your regular season, you might be in trouble. It might work out, but you might be in trouble.
Yeah.
Jared, what you got this round?
Just going back to Watson real quick. No one wants to hear this, but Watson only played 5 full games last year. He finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback in 3 of those 5 games. Despite not playing well, I'm not arguing that the guy played well last year, but because of the rushing, he still was a top 10 quarterback in 60% of his games. I think if I'm Shane, and I'm sure he is, he potentially going to add a second quarterback here as insurance behind Watson, or maybe not. You can always use the waiver wire, but I think upside wise, I think he's the best of the available quarterbacks at this point by a pretty big margin. I'm going to take here a guy who, I'm not going to say I haven't drafted him at all this year, but I've drafted very little of Nick Chubb. In round 12 is my 5th running back. Like, obviously don't need him early in the season, and he's not going to be a factor early in the season, but potentially over the second half of the year as bye weeks start to hit, and as maybe some of these other backs I've drafted earlier get hurt, Nick Chubb could be someone that ends up helping me. And I think again, in the 12th round, he's worth the gamble.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect time to take Nick Chubb. If he just is never anywhere close to himself this year, you've lost nothing. It's your 5th running back in round 12. And if he is anything close to Nick Chubb at any point, then he's going to be a big value. As a 5th running back, he gives you that room to be patient, where we can't expect him to be close in September. But if he is in November and you've been able to hold on to him to that point, you're going to reap the benefits. I've gotten here with no tight end. I've got every other position pretty well covered. So I believe TJ Hawkinson is still on the board. Let me open up my sidebar and check. Hawkinson's still around. So I'm going to go ahead and take him here, because at this point, I don't care if he's ready at the beginning. And then what I'm going to do is double up that position, make sure that I'm set at the early part of the year. The draft war room wants me to take running backs. Obviously, the draft war room can't know that TJ Hawkinson has a chance to not play in week 1. So it's just saying, I'm going to instead take Tyler Conklin here, who I like as my week 1 starter. A pretty safe bet for decent production, and I think a chance to finish the season among the top 12. I think there's a chance that I wind up with 2 guys that are capable of putting up top 12 PPR numbers if they're both healthy, whenever Hawkinson's ready.
And I think Hawkinson and Conklin particularly is a nice fit, because I think Conklin might be his most productive early in the season when Mike Williams is ramping up. I think early in the season, Conklin right there with Breece Hall, they're going to be the second and third options in that passing game, or, maybe in the second half of the year, Conklin, falls behind Mike Williams. But by that point, you're going to have Hawkinson hopefully back at full strength. So I like that tight end combo you just put together.
And as a general practice, I probably wouldn't take 2 tight ends if I were picking anybody inside the top 12 in this format, because there will be guys available on the waiver wire. But for this specific way of building, like I said, with Hawkinson and uncertainty heading into the season, I'm going to go ahead and get somebody that I know is going to be starting week 1.
And back on the clock here, I am going to make a brand pick now and take Dontavian Wicks. There's obvious playing time questions. The Packers have 4 really good wide receivers, even Bo Melton flash down the stretch. All these receivers have been getting hyped up. He's going to be my 6th wide receiver. It might be the case where Wicks needs an injury to one of those other 3 guys to be someone we can really trust in fantasy lineups. But I think he's a good player. I think that Packers passing game is going to be really good this year. So I think, Wicks for the upside in round 13, he's a pretty easy click for me.
I'm shocked to see you take Dontavian Wicks, but yeah, I have no argument against him at this stage. Shane, what are you looking at?
Yeah, at the 13-11, really for me here, it's do I take an upside running back or take that QB2 and try to play matchups? I think there's enough quarterbacks in this type of format where I can use the waiver wire. I can pick up a player if Watson's not performing. So I'm going to take potential sleeper who I think is going to get some carries and maybe has a path with injury to get some good playing time at running back. And that's Ty Chandler, the running back for the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, Aaron Jones has a high chance of injury, according to the Draft Sharks injury predictor. And Ty Chandler was effective when he was in last year. So I like getting him as kind of a late round flyer, a guy that can be an easy cut if it doesn't work out. And I'm just going to let the draft war room do the talking for kicker. Kaimi Fairburn for the Texans is someone that we like a lot, and that's an easy pick here at the 1402.
You need a kicker. He's a kicker. Now, I think the round 13 pick is one where knowing your league can help out, because there are lots of leagues where I agree with you. You'll find a quarterback on the waiver wire after the draft if Watson's not working out for you. There are other leagues that just gobble up quarterbacks because they see them as limited assets, and people will take 3 of them thinking, oh, that guy Shane is going to be screwed when Watson sucks again, and he's going to be coming begging me for a quarterback, and I'm going to beat him in a trade. So if your league's like that, I think there would be nothing wrong with, instead of Ty Chandler, taking that second quarterback. But I also agree with you, Shane. There's nothing wrong with going running back right there and taking your chances. Jared, what do you got here? Looks like kicker and defense time, right?
Yeah, kicker defense time. Kicker, I'm looking for a good offense, and ideally with good early season matchups. And then same goes with defense. I'm going to end up streaming both of those positions throughout the season. I'm really just looking for early season stuff. I'll go ahead and take a kicker first, and I guess I will lean on the draft war room here with Jason Sanders. I need to study kicker scoring more, or maybe I don't. I think Sanders was kind of disappointing in fantasy last year because he just kicked so many extra points and not enough field goals. But like that stuff tends to regress. Miami probably won't be quite as efficient in the red zone this year, and Sanders should get more field goals.
Right. The teams that are hyper efficient in scoring touchdowns tend to come down. The teams that are very poorly efficient in scoring touchdowns tend to go up the next season. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Unfortunately, we have our in-house engineer, Alex Korf, to really dig into the kicker numbers, build his kicker model, and help us know which kickers are going to help us the most for the season, as well as week to week. You talked about streaming. Like, defense is a position that's commonly streamed at this point, but kicker is also a position that people should stream more than they do. I'm going kicker defense here. I'm going to follow the draft worm. I'm going to take Matt Gay as my guy. And then on the defense side, we have changed how we do these versus in the past. It was just doing our full season projections for defense before, which we knew wasn't really the way to do it, because you're not drafting a defense to be your every week starter throughout the year. What you should be doing is playing matchup. So now we've got trust factor built in. And for a position like quarterback, that's saying this guy is a little bit uncertain to score the way you want him to, so maybe get some insurance earlier. At defense, though, the way that trust factor works is it pumps up those defenses that have good early matchups, especially week one. It knocks down some defenses that have worse matchups early on, because that's the way that we play it. That's the way you should play it. You should be targeting a defense in your draft that's got, at the very least, a good week one matchup, and ideally beyond that. So the Cowboys topped my board here. I went with the Cowboys as my defense. Feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, so it's defense for me in the final round. I plan on picking on the Patriots offense all season with my defenses. New England opens up at Cincinnati, so great spot for the Bengals defense. Again, not that, we love the Bengals defense year long, but week one, it's an excellent spot. The Bengals should jump out to a lead in that game. You could see likely Jacoby Brissett at the drop back 40 plus times, and I like the Bengals upside in that scenario.
Shane, what defense are you closing out with?
Similar to Jared, I can't pick on the Patriots since he did, but I'll pick on the Carolina Panthers. Though I think their offense will be better this year than they were last year, but they are going up against the New Orleans Saints in week one. The Saints had a pretty good defense last year. They're pretty solid. So I think it's a good matchup, and I'll stream the rest of the way.
Oh, Grandpa went with a rookie, 2 rookie wide receivers in his final 4 picks. Okay. So maybe the guy is more of a forward thinker than we thought, but he picked a bad rookie.
I think Grandpa fell asleep late in the draft and got auto picked.
The grandson took over. All right. Besides the quarterback, Shane, any second guesses or any final notes on your team now that you've got it all built?
I feel pretty good. I feel good about, 4 wide receivers, 2 running backs, those first 6 picks based on how the board fell. I thought that was pretty solid. Quarterback is probably my one regret that I would have taken a little bit earlier. And outside of that, I feel good about the late round upside while still having some solid starters to kick off the season.
Jared, what about you? Final takeaways from your team?
Kind of similar to Shane, where if quarterback is his regret, tight end would be my regret. Honestly, most drafts I've done this year, I'm taking a Mark Andrews or a Trey McBride, or if I miss on those guys, a Kittle or a Pitts. If I could do this draft again, I might take Kincaid over James Conner in round 5, which I did consider Kincaid, but straight up, I do prefer Conner. But kind of looking back at this and the fact that I was able to get Pollard and Warren as late as I did, I might have rather taken Kincaid there. So, but again, I do like Freiermuth, and in a league that's not super deep. We only went 15 rounds. We have guys like Noah Fant on the waiver wire, Hunter Henry on the waiver wire, who can give me decent production if Freiermuth doesn't work out.
Yeah, I think it worked out for you there. I would much rather have Pat Freiermuth in the 10th versus Dalton Kincaid in the 5th on my own team. I'm in the draft war room right now as opposed to the sleeper draft room. Let's go up and see how our teams fared by the grading system. Oh, would you look at that? If we go by the Draft Sharks projections, Matt seems to have the top team heading into the season. Seems like the consensus is number 2.
That bench is looking weak, though.
That's because I got some injured guys down there, but I don't know who scores points during the week.
And these are largely my projections too, so I can't even say the projections are bad.
So we ran through a full mock draft there. We showed you how the draft war room works. Obviously, you're going to have lots more time to practice your drafts, but that time is also getting shorter as we get closer to the season. So, keep practicing these mock drafts. Like we mentioned earlier, you can do that practicing right there on draftsharks.com, where the advantage is you can mock with your actual league settings. Maybe you play in a league that just, doesn't have all the right things to make any of our draft guides the right fit for you. So the best fit for you is just to take your exact settings, do a mock draft in that format, see what you like, play around with your picks along the way, do it a bunch of times in different ways and see what works best. The Draft War Room will also now sync with third-party mock drafts on sites like Yahoo, ESPN, CBS. That's a new feature this year, so you can also use it to practice there if you want to go draft against other real live drafters. Both sets of practicing will help you get ready for draft day. Check out the draft guide articles on draftsharks.com. If there is one that's close enough to your format, that's helpful content. We're going to be updating those pretty much weekly at this point up until the start of the season. And if you haven't done so already, get all of the insider information by subscribing to Draft Sharks. You can now do that at a prorated level, so you can get the draft package for cheaper than it ever has been before. Check the show notes for the link, and please let us be your unfair advantage.